Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidira. The time is 21 minutes past 9, and we'll be looking at a very, very interesting topic in a bit. We'll be speaking to Dr. Dale McKinley. He's a political analyst and economist, and we'll be looking at the Rand. We saw the Rand tumble to an almost 2-week low on Thursday after the DA threatened to walk away from the government of national unity over a disagreement with the ANC. And over the proposed composition of cabinet. South Africa's currency, which was already under pressure in morning trade due to a stronger dollar, weakened to 18.41 to the dollar before recouping some of the losses to trade at 18.39 cents at around 10 past 11. And I just want to talk to Dr. Dale McKinley about the impact of political stability and the formation of the GNU and how that will have an impact on the South African Rand and the economy at large. Dr. McKinley is joining us via StreamYard. Good morning, Dr. McKinley. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time.
Good morning, and to the listeners as well.
Doc, I think, if there's something, I'm no economist. I'm just a radio host, that likes to learn and understand. And I think I represent the broader community. As I was looking, on my television, listening to radio on the news, and I was looking forward to doing this story. I did some background research, right? And I was looking at Kenya. I think in the past 2-3 weeks, we've been seeing what's happening in Kenya. There's been a lot of protests, uprising, the storming of parliament over the President William Ruto's finance bill and its implementation. Ultimately, we saw that being withdrawn. I just looked at the Kenyan shilling and how it was trading, and it was pretty stable. There wasn't really anything of that much happening when it comes to how it was trading with the dollar and other major currencies. But then I'm looking at South Africa. And I think if you can just indulge me here, I'm looking at South Africa and political party that was not necessarily in government. They make up part of a proposed GNU. Well, they kind of sneeze or whimper or say any kind of sentiment, whether it's walking away or joining the GNU, and the Rand reacts so drastically. I think we saw when it was first announced that the DA will be merging with the ANC and there's going to be this GNU, the markets were on a high. They were doing really great. And then now they're threatening to leave the GNU and the Rand falls to that 2-week low. Why such contrast? Why is there seemingly such more focus on South Africa and its stability and its formation of government and its impact on the economy than maybe at a Kenya, which saw weeks of protests and instability?
Okay, well, I think there are several reasons for that. One is that South Africa has the largest economy in the continent by far. It's hooked into international trade and currency and markets and debt markets much more than Kenya is, even though Kenya is fairly integrated. But in relative terms, Kenya is a medium-sized, if very small player. South Africa, on the African continent at least, is considered to be the most strategic with Egypt and Nigeria, a couple of other countries in terms of geostrategically and otherwise. So I think it has its influence and its impact is seen as much greater. That's one thing. The second thing is that in Kenya, you're talking about internal issues around a tax bill. Here, you're talking about the formation of a government. Ruto's government is not in any danger of falling or of changing or anything like that. It's just a question of how they're going to deal with some of the, like we have over the years with many protests on internal matters and other things. Here, we're talking about a seismic change. For 30 years, this has not happened. A new government completely made up of new partners, in particularly, obviously, because the ANC lost its majority and the DA is brought on board. So I think that's the second reason, is the character of what's happening in our country is quite substantially different. Thirdly, though, what we call the markets, and I love this term, the markets, as if this is some homogenous entity that exists out there that has some brain of its own. It's a range of different actors who have very specific particular economic interests and they're playing a game. The market is a casino, essentially, and particularly the currency is basically you bet. You bet on what's happening in politically, geostrategically, oil prices, and people bet to make money. Essentially, is what happens. So that's why you see back and forth. I mean, let's remind the thing that sometimes makes me chuckle is that we read in so much to these things. So, for example, 3 weeks ago, the rand was sitting at 18.9. 18.9. This was before, when things were not clear and the elections, and there was the MK was trying to contest things. And so what the markets, or what capital does, and those who with capital, what they do is, besides playing a particular game, they respond to what they perceive as threats or particular instabilities with regards to macroeconomic policy. So not necessarily internal, whose power relations internal to a country, or whether there's clashes between workers and with unions and governments and whatever, but whether or not the policy formulation is going to change. And this is why you see such responses in this case, because they're basically saying, "Oh, okay, well, GNU looked like it was on track. Okay, we're going to have policy continuity. Things aren't going to change. We can make sure we can have our investments. We can do these things." And then 2 weeks later, "Ooh, it's not so clear that this is going to happen. We're going to send a message by selling off the rand," or whatever it is. And then you see these fluctuations. So it sends signals. The signals are powerful signals that capital itself is sending, as opposed to, for example, writing a letter to the president to say, "We think you should change your policy." What you see is, you see the rand going down forth. You see people threatening non-investment in order to be able to influence politically what is happening. So I would say those would be the three main sort of explanatory characteristics.
Let's touch a bit on investor sentiment right now. With the rand fluctuating, amidst this political negotiations and the formation of this GNU, how do you think investor sentiment towards South Africa is being affected? Are we seeing a shift in confidence? Where are we standing right now? As there's this seemingly, deadlock in negotiations between the DA and the ANC. Cabinet was expected to be announced this week, and there's still nothing.
Yeah, I think I said this before. I think we're very impatient as South Africans, in terms of what is happening, and it's somewhat understandable. But let's just take an example in Europe recently. The Dutch took 6 months to form a coalition government. 6 months after the elections, by the time they finished the negotiations. We jump on anything. It's like, "Oh, it hasn't happened in a week. Oh my gosh, we have a disaster. Oh my gosh, we're going to enter into," and I think, first of all, people, because this is new, because this is something we haven't experienced before, we're tending to sort of be a bit naive, one, about what is necessary to pull all of this together, which is very complex, and many different interests, many different kinds of demands. And you're talking about 10 political parties here, not just the DA, but other formations that have to be taken on board. And second, I think we want to see something. People are so desperate and so angry at the situation. They want to see change now. So I think in that sense, we need to see that these things might take a little bit of time. But in terms of the first part of your question, in relation to the investors and everything else, their main levers are, the threats, essentially, and the threats that they can pull, or that they will not invest if you don't do this, or if you're not market friendly, or if you're going to change. And that's the way. Remember when the Fitch credit rating agency just about a week or two ago issued a statement that was highly criticized for political interference, which basically said, "We hope that the GNU keeps things the way they are," essentially. Of course they do, because it benefits their capital markets and trade, and they don't want to see nationalization. They don't want to see land expropriation. They don't want to see all the other different kinds of positions. So this is a political game that's being played, and investors are playing on this board. But their tools to play are mostly messages through the market.
I think you touched a bit on rating agencies. I think for the longest time, the likes of S&P and Fitch have come under a lot of scrutiny in how they rate South Africa. Just how credible are these agencies? These rating agencies, can their projections be taken to heart as the true lived realities and expectations of a country's economic outlook and performance?
Not at all. I think that they're not. Most people in South Africa, most people across the global South as well, have no idea who these rating agencies are. They're situated in capitals, whether it's in New York, Paris, Hong Kong, London, wherever they are, and they basically, their power does not lie in internal politics of the country. Their power lies in the international market, in the currency, in the debt market, in particular, in borrowing costs. So when a rating agency says, well, we're going to grade you, we're going to downgrade you from B to B minus, or BB this to C or something like this, what that does is, for most people, they have no idea what this means, or it's like, why are they doing this? But on the debt markets, what it means is it's more expensive to borrow. Simple as that. It basically, if it's everybody understands that when you have a personal credit rating that goes down, it makes it more difficult for you to get money. When you go to the bank to get that bond or to get that loan, they're going to say, well, you've had some problems here. The bank is telling us that your credit rating agency is a bit lower because you haven't repaid whatever it is. So that's really the impact of the credit rating agencies, is it makes it, for those countries who are needing to borrow money and needing to get into the debt, which is most countries, including the United States and the rich countries, they borrow all the time. Then it makes it more expensive. And when you make it more expensive, that makes the interest rates more. That means your budget, there's less for social services, there's less for other kinds of things. And this is where the impact is. It's in the budgetary distribution, and then what we call austerity politics, because then if you looked at the budget last year, you could see how much money was being shifted to interest payments and for debt repayments. And that's the real impact in terms of ordinary people.
And you touched a bit on the borrowing cost. I want us to touch a bit on the political risk premium. Do you think the rand's current valuation reflects an adequate political risk premium? And how might these uncertainties impact South Africa's borrowing costs and overall fiscal ability?
Well, I love these terms that they use, political risk premium. It sounds as if it's something scientific. If we were to be honest about these things, one would look at France at the moment. Let's take a look at France. Macron is called a snap election because of this. There's a lot of he might lose to the right wing. There's a lot of instability. But you don't hear people talking about the France is now the scale. The political risk instability in France is going through the floor or whatever it is, and therefore people are really, really worried about things. Where you find this mostly is in countries that are in the global South, countries that are developing, or however we want to call them, where their power within the market, their power within the international trade regime is fairly minimal. So basically, all of those who have the capital, which are predominantly not in places like South Africa, even though our economy is one of the wealthier ones in our continent, but in the global context, it's small fry, relatively speaking. So what you have is those that are there with the capital saying, well, since things are not very predictable, yes, the political risk premium is very high if the GNU doesn't come in the next few days, and we're going to punish the South African economy by raising interest rates, by degrading your credit rating, by playing with your currency in order to sell off, by doing all these other kinds of things that will send these kinds of messages. So it's a political game that's being played in order to pressure countries to do the kinds of things that people with capital want them to do, which is to make them safe havens, to make them very predictable, to give them tax breaks, to give them all the things that they want. And this is what we've been fighting for, here and many other countries for a long period of time in that context. So I think there is obviously a real reality to political risk when you have real instability. But here, I think it's being a bit overplayed in the context of South Africa, and double standards are being applied that don't get applied in the West or in the North in particular, when exactly the same kinds of political questions happen.
And speaking on political stability, I think after the elections, a lot was said about how the ANC is going to be choosing its new alliance partners. Is it going to reflect the will of the people, or is going to want to please the markets? The quote unquote markets that you mentioned. But in your opinion, what should be prioritized by South Africa's leadership right now? Should we be prioritizing political stability and the will of the people, or focusing on economic growth and reform, essentially?
Both. There's no necessary disconnection between those two things. The question is the degree of what kinds of economic reforms on the one side. And I mean, political stability is relative in our country, as we know, irrespective of whether or not, I mean, when we had the ANC receiving 70-something% of the vote, and ex-President Zuma was was in charge, there was a lot of political instability because of what was happening in terms of governance and state capture and other kinds of things. So I think when we talk about political instability, what we're talking about is that there's not constant fighting. There's a government that's been formed. It has some coherence. There's some kind of policy coherence. I think that's going to happen. I think it's just going to take some time, and there's going to be a lot of hard bargaining, a lot of words thrown around, a lot of this is in some ways, I think, to be expected. So I'm not so particularly concerned about the political side of things in terms of the stability, because I think we do have fairly strong institutions on that front, although I think it's going to be quite turbulent and rocky. Where I think the main thing, and most people, when you talk about the will of the people, it's not so much, let's remember that in these last elections, the biggest vote was the no vote. Those who stayed away from the polls, those who didn't exercise the right to vote, and that says a lot. But I think where we would have complete continuity, applicability across the board, is in the socioeconomic front. People who wanting improved lives, who want to get jobs, who want to be able to pay their rent, who want to be able to put food on the table. These are the basics of life. So I think in that context, the real issue for the incoming GNU and others is what kind of policy reform we're talking about. And in this case, this is where the real debate lies. Because if they're going to continue with what we've experienced for the last 30 years, and they're just going to tinker with, on the sides and shift a little bit of money there for more expenditure, or whatever, it's not going to address the fundamental structural problems in our economy. And the structural problems in our economy have to do with race and class and the legacies of apartheid that have to be addressed. These cannot be wished away because you have a investment policy that, a few new corporations come in and establish new factories and create a few thousand jobs. That's not going to do it. We're going to need a situation where we have to have redistribution of opportunity and small scale and business growth. And this is where I think, let me just give one example of where I think they have not bit the bullet in terms of understanding the necessary need for some radical macroeconomic change. I don't mean radical in the sense of MK or the FF nationalization. I'm talking about radical in the sense of shifting from big corporates and investment and all the big projects that we tend to focus on, and shifting it to the ordinary person. Small scale businesses, medium scale businesses, creating local economies, creating all the necessary basic infrastructure that is necessary for that. You grow the local economies from the bottom up, and then you have a sustainable economy that's inclusive and begins to address people's needs. Where we have is we're coming from the top and trying to address all the big issues and hoping it trickles down. It hasn't worked. It won't work. If they don't actually start reforming on that front, we're going to face the same problems that we've been facing for the last 25 to 30 years.
And just lastly, Doc, I think it's so easy sometimes to get lost in the economic jargon and, the use of this, big words without understanding that the ordinary South African might not quite understand what this means to them personally on a broader scale. Looking at all of this, the current status quo, how might ordinary South Africans, feel the effects of this political standoff in their daily lives, particularly, concerning inflation and job security, and maybe even after these negotiations, the formation of the GNU itself, the kind of lived reality experience for the ordinary South Africans. What is the expectation in that front?
Well, the first part of your question, right now, the uncertainty, the fact that we still don't have a government, so to speak, in the sense of the GNU, the impacts on ordinary people are generally that things stand still. And remember, these are provincial and national issues. So it's not just a national government of unity. It's all the provincial governments as well that have to then be formed and to take, and they have a lot of their own delivery issues that they've got to deal with in particular provinces that have very particular problems. So if you don't have a certainty around a particular government that can start policy, can start implementing, things just tend to stand still. So they don't tend to happen. And I think that's the biggest, whether that's in terms of being able to create jobs, or to be able to make investments, to be able to deal with service and infrastructural problems that many communities are facing. All these things would be impacted. In the longer term, if we do, if the GNU gets formed and it begins to act as a government and starts to develop policy and implement its governance mandate, as the voters have said across the board with this, then I think it basically goes down to what we're all waiting to see. What is that going to mean? Is this government, for example, going to, because the DA is now would be in the government, is it going to be more market friendly? In other words, are they going to take BEE away, or is it going to be less, social grants for people? These are the things that people are asking. Are the jobs that are in, for example, expanded public works and all sorts of other kinds of public works programs, are these going to be lessened? These are the things that will impact people. Am I going to be able to go to a bank and get a loan? Will the small scale business provide me with some support? When I go and fill out the form, will Home Affairs work? And will I be waiting for an ID for another 6 months to 8 months in order to be able to get a job, or to be able to? These are the fundamental things that people are thinking about. And the GNU is going to have to grapple with them, as every government has, but improve on what has come before. And if there's stasis, in other words, if there's no change, people are going to get very frustrated very quickly, because their expectations here are that something's going to change for the more positive, not a negative change, but a positive change. What that is remains to be seen. But the GNU has its work cut out for it, and we need this to happen sooner rather than later, but also in a very serious and structured way, so that where we don't just put in place a government that doesn't know what it's doing.
I think we're going to leave it there. Political analyst and economist, Dr. Dale McKinley. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time and kind of explaining this complicated economic terms that are having a lot of South Africans really, really nervous about the future. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Dale McKinley just giving us insight on the impact of the GNU on the South African rand. We saw that the DA threatened to leave the GNU, and the rand tanked to an almost 2-week low this past Thursday. We're going to take a quick break. We'll see you after this.